Thanks everyone for coming out here. So yeah, I'm Paul Daniels. I'm the Manager of Research Development at Athabasca University. We're in Canada. I've got carriage over Pure for our university. I'm joined here today by MacKinley Darlington, our Knowledge Mobilization Specialist, and Bushra, the SME that we work with Pure. So just a quick roadmap. So what we'll talk about today is I'll start by telling a bit about the AU context and where we are with Pure. And then we'll speak a bit about impact content type in Pure, briefly on the UK REF model, how it supports, or how the impact content type is used to support it, and then the Canadian context and how we're using impacts in Pure to meet our needs. And then some lessons learned just to wrap up at the end. So in brief, Athabasca University is Canada's open online university. So we're based in Alberta, but we have researchers and staff members who work across the country, and we've got students from around the country and around the world. So we're open and welcoming for anybody 16 years older to study here. They don't need to be based in Canada for that purpose. And we're very open, and we have a very inherent interest in supporting open research and celebrating the ways in which our research activities are impactful for communities. We've been on, we're relatively new to Pure. We've been on our journey for about a year and a half or just under 2 years. And we've had a staggered launch to rolling out the different functionalities that Pure supports. We launched our Pure portal in April last year, and now we're focusing on the grants or the award management module. Now this year, we're also focusing on rolling out the impact content type and using it to support our journey with Pure. I've just got some screenshots here to show some of the views for our portal. A lot of it is focused in North America, but also outside of the North American context. And then just briefly, some of the successes that we've been using in our implementation journey around learning from our earlier stages to inform how best to navigate while moving forward. We set up an advisory group involving deans and other stakeholders to inform what we should do with Pure researchers as Pure champions who wrote knowledge articles to share with their community what they got value out of with Pure, as a for instance. So that's a bit about us and our journey with Pure. I'll now turn it over to Bushra to talk about the impact content type.
Thanks, Paul. So impacts is actually a content type in Pure, and you can find impacts as part of the core module. And it's essentially a narrative spin on contextual records. So the way I describe it is it's a so what record. So a professional XYZ activity has relations with an award, a project, certain outputs, and so on. It essentially helps you capture detailed outcomes and impact descriptions throughout your research projects. And you can also add supporting evidence. You can add documents and other corroborating statements to make it more comprehensive. And as we all know, the power of Pure is in its data model. So even with impacts, linkages to related content help strengthen the evidence that's part of it. And it also helps with enhancing its visibility on the Pure portal. So now that we have an understanding of what impacts are, we just wanted to give you an overview of the global utilization of Pure for tracking research impact. And what we see typically is that the types of impact are centered around knowledge exchange activities, and then also external outcomes and impacts of faculty work. And approximately 29,000 records, impact records are found in Pure. And we've seen over the past 2 years there has been a growth in the number or the volume of impact records, which is about 23%. And the examples or types of impacts that we generally see are those that are around sharing new information, practical benefits of new knowledge, effects on policy, and then societal impacts. So moving from that global usage, we wanted to focus and highlight a couple of key features and functionalities that you will find in impacts should you choose to use that content type. So the first step is, of course, to configure it. And if you want to configure impacts, that is found under the administrative module. And you can always reach out to the support team to turn that on for you. There are two options that you can choose from, a basic version and then the extended version. The two are similar, but of course in the extended version you have more fields within the metadata. So you can capture data information, impact levels, categorizations like that, and then also record impact evidence. You can also define the type of impact, the nature, and then also add any evidence indicators, which we will go to in a second. And then as far as the workflows are concerned, it's a typical standard 3-step workflow that you find in other content types as well. So you can, as I mentioned, add evidence records. You can add qualitative and quantitative parameters or indicators. So that could be something along the lines of, any kind of award or, policy information and things like that. Even testimonials, so you can add certain indicators as part of the impact record. Of course, the dates where the evidence was observed, any additional details and contact information, and then corroborating evidence and documents or any links that make the record more robust. And just to note, multiple evidence records can be created and associated with impact. So as I mentioned earlier, the power of Pure is really in its data model and creating those connections between different content types. So similarly with impacts, you can add other content types and relations. That could be press media, activities, projects, data sets, and so on and so forth. So that's how you kind of create those web of connections and really strengthen that evidence. So what are the ways or the use cases in which Pure amplifies impact? One, of course, big use case of Pure is showcasing, and you can utilize impacts to, again, bolster that showcasing use case as well. So we have two examples here, the Aalborg University and the Charles Sturt University, who are showcasing their impact records in Pure. And again, just to note, you can add evidence records, but they're not included in the public-facing side, again, just to be mindful of any potential issues with data and privacy and other concerns around that. So again, from the perspective of showcasing, we found this quite interesting as well. This is essentially the web analytics surrounding who's looking at impacts and where is that traffic really coming from. So what we see on the left is basically visits to impact records, and we see that the UK, Australia, and Denmark are the top 3. So these are portals essentially where most traffic is received on impact records. And then on the right, what we see is where are these visits coming from? So which countries are most looking at impact records? And we see that the top 3 is the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. So quite interesting to see that trend. And the total visits that we see when it comes to impact visits is around 18,800. And this is 1 year's worth of data. So in terms of use cases around impacts, maybe many of you are already familiar with this, which is the UKRI REF use case. So for those of you who may not be familiar, the UKRI REF stands for the United Kingdom Research and Innovation Research Excellence Framework. And it is a system that is used to assess the quality of research that is captured at higher education institutions. And they look at certain parameters like the quality of the research outputs, any kind of research environments, and also the impact, of course, which is the real world, reach. So in Pure, you can actually record impacts in that way, and it is utilized for this specific use case. So here are just examples of how you can add that information, add the supporting evidence, and also, in addition to the showcasing aspect that we saw earlier, you can also create impact reports. And the screenshot on the right is an example of that. At the bottom is a link to a case study of impacts, and you'll be able to find, as part of that case study, the summary of the project, the underpinning research, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'll turn it over to MacKinley.
Great, thanks, Bushra. Hi, everyone. As I start on the next couple of slides here, I think let's ground ourselves in what I mean by knowledge mobilization, because I'm going to be talking about that a fair bit. But there is, in the Canadian context, there's been a shift of late related to the language around knowledge mobilization, and it's evolved from the term used to describe almost exclusively end-of-project dissemination efforts to where we're now using knowledge mobilization to describe more broadly what researchers do to engage with target audiences throughout the research process. So from idea all the way to impact. And it is that exchange. It's not just that push out. There's that feedback back into the processes as well. In a minute here, we'll talk about why the shift has happened in Canada. But for now, I'd like us all operating on sort of the shared understanding that knowledge mobilization is a way to make research useful to society by enabling knowledge users, the next users of our research, to take evidence-informed action and create evidence-informed change. So there's this kind of, pervasive misconception that knowledge mobilization is about an output. It's a thing. It's a final product, such as a publication, or we're seeing a lot of infographics in this space, a commercialized project, a widget, something like that. But really, knowledge mobilization is about a collection of scholarly efforts and outputs. So it's a process, right? We're seeing, I can't move the mic. I'm a hand talker, so apologies if this doesn't work out. So knowledge mobilization, it's a process. It involves a strategic development of multiple outputs, strategies, and activities over time to achieve specific knowledge mobilization goals. Now, a central tenet of knowledge mobilization is the notion of impact. So making a difference in the world around us. And we're trying to use the impact content type here at AU to help capture and communicate this type of impact, this type of facilitated impact. The change and the resulting benefit that's been facilitated by our research and knowledge mobilization activities. But within the Canadian context, I'll be honest, this is kind of tricky. So in Canada, we're encouraged to be mission-driven in that we incentivize a focus on how to create impacts, which is notably different than the REF model that Bushra mentioned, where researchers are incentivized to focus on what impacts have occurred. So in the Canadian context, we are used to presenting plans for impact, but there's no real expectation or external structure that really mandates or even necessarily encourages us to actually demonstrate follow-through on our plans. There's some like reporting modules related to certain grant funding, but it's not, it's not a big piece of that. So really, it's kind of an honor system, which if you, know the Canadian stereotypes, that's a very Canadian thing. They just sort of trust that we're going to do it. So how did we get here as a country? In the past, our focus, as I mentioned, has been on that linear model of knowledge mobilization, that one-way sharing of information, such as dissemination, tech transfer, commercialization activities. We have always been aware that academic research should have an impact on society, but there's this disconnect between our awareness and really requiring anything to be done about it. At present, we're now recognizing that we need to continue our journey and our efforts to move beyond this linear model of mobilization to focus more on relationships, partnered approaches, and complex collaborations. But we're still figuring out how to support this work and how to capture and communicate our progress and successes. In the future, and I would argue that this is not so distant of a future, impact will become a core component of the Canadian research enterprise. And we're likely to see a parallel operation of different models, so mission and assessment, and perhaps others, to support our Canadian understanding of research impact. So you'll see some of these as opportunity within our implementation, but also challenges around being mission-driven, as well as with our impact literacy. So we do need to see an increase in capacity building for individual and institutional impact literacy in order to keep up with the new impact-focused culture that we're moving into. So at AU, we're using the impacts content type as a lever to help build impact literacy at our institution. So if you were to take a look at the impact entries we have in our peer instance, you'll see a varying degree of impact literacy represented. We still have a lot of work to do on the literacy front, but this content type is giving us a consistent space to do that from. And to help facilitate the sort of necessary capacity building work. One of my biggest worries as a knowledge mobilization and research impact professional is that this impact content type would sort of become a catch-all for everything non-academic, which we don't want it to be. You know, as we sort of talked about earlier, it's deliberate, it's strategic, it's over time, it's a strategy, it's not just an output of activity. And so how can we make this content type work for us in that space? So to do this, we've developed a fairly comprehensive step sheet articulating what we mean when we use the language of knowledge mobilization and research impact. We provide staff support to help with the education of our faculty and staff in this space. And we're using the description of impact field that you see up here, for instance, as a way to really tell the story. So storytelling is a really important component of this for us. It's not just entering in the data, it's taking up the space to tell that story of research impact. I'll also quickly note here that we have customized the impact content type to be specific to our institutional needs as well. You'll see the fields related to place-based activities on this screen grab. So the AU community is being asked by our senior leadership team to report on activities that are happening in our home community. So even though we're open and online institution, we do have a home base in Northern Alberta. And so we're asked to report on activities happening in this space. This is one way that we're doing that and being able to pull that information to meet those needs. Another customization that we made is related to the categories of impact. We don't have a larger structure like REF to predetermine some of these categories, so we've identified and described our own that tie in our strategic research plan and our institutional priorities. Our approach to using the impact content type is really to help us capture and communicate the excellent research and knowledge mobilization strategies our folks are using to generate impact. As Paul mentioned, we're Canada's open university, and I just referenced that again, so you're probably, that's going to be your main takeaway. We are Canada's open university. But so we do see a lot of layering of the principles associated with being open with our faculty knowledge mobilization work. So in order to align with and be true to the Canadian context in which we're operating, while also embracing our open institutional identity, we have to be deliberate with our approach and use the impact content type to work as a way to work for us. Okay. Over to Paul.
Thanks, MacKinley. So I'll just tie together a few last threads and share some takeaways for you here. And so one of the things that we've learned is how we can use the impact content type to drive engagement and uptake with both pure and knowledge mobilization and impact literacy. So there's this kind of synergy where we can get good mileage in uplifting both pure within our research community and knowledge mobilization and impact. And I talked earlier about some of the successes that we've been using on our impact journey, or rather implementation journey of pure, and now how we're using those to get good mileage out of impact content types in pure. And so our approach has been to launch impact records in kind of tranches. And one of the main reasons is because I think there's a real strength in this web of relations between different content types. So if you have an impact record, and you can link it to research outputs or project records, and then you can really start communicating and celebrating the ways in which these different kinds of research activities are being impactful and tell that kind of narrative. We've also been doing some work with another team on impact AI. This widget is related to this. I'm not going to dive into that here. If you're curious, come to another talk I'm part of after lunch. Yeah, I guess the main takeaway for audience members here is that while the impact content type might have been originally designed with the UK REF model in mind, I think it's very much value add no matter what context you're operating in, whether it's the Canadian one, Australian one, or wherever. The customizability of it allows us to really celebrate in the ways that we need the research activities and how it's impactful for our communities, for the Athabasca region itself in our case. And it really, empowers researchers to tell that story around impact. I think I'm probably at time, so I'll end there.
All right, let's thank our next speakers. Now, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions so we don't cut into the break too much. So if you have a question, we'll be floating around with the microphones.
Paul, thank you very much. Quick question. What determines when you create an impact content type? What triggers it?
That's a good question. We really are on a journey with that. So we're trying to get some use cases in the system. Ideally, we're sort of taking like a perspective impact sort of take on things. Is impacts being generated can be within the first 6 months of a research project, or it could be 10 years down the line. So how do you kind of track that change over time that's happening there? So we're encouraging folks to sort of project out, which is also a very Canadian thing, right? Like we're developing these plans. So what is our plan? What do we foresee this impact looking like? And then coming back in with the evidence after and modifying from there. So one thing actually our community has been quite good with is incorporating that evidence of the impact into their narrative pieces that we're trying to use with this content type. So.
And I'll just add one quick thing. So now that we've started to press into the space and we have the step sheets that MacKinley mentioned, we're able to start building the impact content into the wider workflows around research projects to have triggers. So okay, now there's some impact emerging. Let's get it captured in Pure and start celebrating it and then sharing that narrative.
Maybe one more question. All right, great. Let's thank our speakers one more time.